One of our flagship products, Gluten Shield, was designed to support people on their gluten-free journey. It's especially beneficial for those just learning about their gluten sensitivity. There's an average 12-week learning curve in that. It was designed to protect from accidental gluten exposure and cross-contamination, as well as to support and protect you during travel or eating out. It was not designed to help you eat more gluten. That's a key. Now, Gluten Shield key ingredients include proteolytic enzymes and something called DPP4. Now, this enzyme has been shown to break down the proline and glutamine bonds in gluten proteins. It also contains a proteolytic enzyme blend designed to help you break down proteins. Remember, years of gluten-induced intestinal and stomach damage can sometimes inhibit that process. It contains carbohydrate-busting enzymes that support the digestion of the starchy components of grains. And it contains a very specialized probiotic called Bifidobacterium infantis. Bifidobacterium infantis is a specialized probiotic strain that has been shown in research studies to aid in the breakdown of difficult-to-digest carbohydrate elements found in grains. It's also been shown with celiacs to reduce intestinal symptoms. It also helps support overall digestion. Now, Gluten Shield also contains an herbal blend for additional digestive support. It contains fennel, which aids in digestion and supports relaxation of the smooth muscle lining the GI tract. It contains ginger, traditionally used for nausea and upset stomach. It's also believed to promote digestion by increasing the flow of saliva, gastric juices, and bile. It also contains peppermint, used to support digestion and to provide relief from GI discomfort. Now, recommended use for Gluten Shield, if you're taking it for daily maintenance, just take 1 capsule with each meal or snack for supporting digestion and daily gluten protection. For enhanced performance, take 2 capsules with each meal or snack for travel or eating out. Now, if you want it for aggressive use, take 3 capsules with each meal or snack. This is best for gluten-free newbies, those who are new to the gluten-free diet and not quite sure whether they're avoiding all of the gluten in their environment. Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We're going to be taking your live questions today, so if you've got questions you'd like me to answer, go ahead and type those in now in the comment section or the feed section, and I'll do my best to get as many answered as I can. Now, if you're new to the show, don't forget to come visit us at glutenfreesociety.org. Sign up for our newsletter there so that we can send you a bunch of free, fantastic information about how to change your diet and change your life and improve your health. So let's dive in. We got several questions already in the feed. So let's see, Cat Con, you're a godsend, Dr. O. Oh, I like this comment. Thank you, Cat Con. 6 months ago, I had an 18:1 inflammation ratio, got retested last week down to 3:1. No grain, no pain was a huge part of that. Wow, I'm glad that no grain, no pain was so helpful for you, Cat. Thank you for sharing your testimony of improvement. That's fantastic. Can one heal intestinal villi? Mary Ellen is asking. So yeah, very simply put, yes, intestinal villi can heal. I mean, the number of different reasons why intestinal villi can become damaged. Of course, gluten is the most well-researched and most famous reason, but there are other reasons intestinal villi will flatten. There are certain medications that can do it, like chronic use of steroids, drugs like methotrexate that are used to treat rheumatological disease can do it. Other drugs for blood pressure, there's a class of medicines called angiotensin receptor blockers, or ARBs. Those medications can cause villus atrophy. Genetically modified organisms have been shown to cause villus atrophy. Pesticides have been shown. They can. So my point is your villi can heal if you have removed the things that are doing the damage to them. And gluten is one of those things, but it's not the only thing. And so that's part of, with a lot of celiacs, they go on this journey, and many of them don't, their villi don't heal after going on this traditional gluten-free diet. And so they're still struggling to fully recover. And this is where you've got to work with your doctor to get more granular about what else could be triggering that villus atrophy. And that's where no grain, no pain comes in, because a lot of the things that we know trigger villus atrophy, we remove going through the no grain, no pain protocol. And so those of you who aren't aware, next Tuesday, I'm going to be doing a 2023 kickoff, a no grain, no pain kickoff challenge, and we're going to be talking all about that on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. So make sure you're here this coming up Tuesday. If you're new to no grain, no pain, and you want to dive in and come along the road with so many other people who are going to be doing the challenge this year. Let's see, do we suggest a low FODMAP diet in conjunction with a gluten-free diet for those who continue to suffer from abdominal gas and bloating? No, no and yes. So sometimes yes, sometimes no. What I suggest is testing, because FODMAPs are a generic guide. Now, if you're still bloating and having digestive problems on a gluten-free diet, you may have reaction to FODMAP. But FODMAPs are a huge group of foods. And so some people react to certain FODMAP-based foods, but not other types of FODMAP. So I generally try not to recommend, excommunicating an entire massive quantity of food group from a person's diet without actually having the testing to back up or to justify that guidance or advice. So, again, generically speaking, if you don't have a doctor and you're just kind of trying to figure it out on your own, you can go low FODMAP and see how well it works for you. But it's not something I would do when I'm working one-on-one with a client. Is certified gluten-free food okay to eat, or are there exceptions to the rule? Certified gluten-free just means this. It means that the food is wheat, barley, and rye-free. That's it. And that's technically not gluten-free. Although, and here's why. The FDA, the definition of what the FDA considers to be gluten are the types of proteins. There's one in wheat called gliadin. There's one in barley called hordein, and there's one in rye called seichoin. These are the three gluten-based proteins that our FDA considers to be gluten. And so when you're looking at a food label that says certified gluten-free, it's only free of wheat, barley, and rye. But there are other kinds of glutens, for example, in corn and in rice. Like corn has a gluten called zein, rice has a gluten called orgenin, and these glutens can also do damage to some people. And so technically, a certified gluten-free food label is not anything more than a wheat, barley, and rye-free food that's been certified to not contain the glutens found in those three grains. But in my opinion, if you're gluten sensitive, you need to be avoiding all grains, not just wheat, barley, and rye, because there are other glutens found in other grains that we also know can create inflammatory damage. Let's see, Richard, 70-year-old or 78-year-old male, feeling like I need more protein. What's the recommended dosage of ultra aminos as I eat breakfast at 10:30 and supper at 4:30? So if you're trying to get more protein in your diet by using ultra aminos, you can take 3 teaspoons at each one of those meals. And that would give you a boost in free-form amino acids, which are the major building blocks toward protein. But let me give you another guide too, Richard, which is you want to take your body weight, whatever it is, and so if you're in the U.S., we weigh by pounds. If you're typically in Europe, it's kilograms. But if you're trying to calculate this protein need formula, you take your body weight in kilograms and multiply it by 1.5 if you're trying to put on muscle and you're trying to put on weight. And that's how many grams of protein you need. So for example, if you are 50 kilograms heavy, then you'd multiply that 50 times 1.5. And so that would mean you need to get at least 75 grams of protein a day out of your diet. So that's just, again, that's a rough estimation or rough calculation that you can use, and anyone can use it. So again, it's 1.5 times the amount of kilogram body weight of grams of protein that a person would need daily if they're trying to put on weight, put on more protein, or just get adequate protein in their diet. Penny asks, how do I check for mineral deficiencies? I was told that by checking for mineral deficiencies, it can help to figure out what foods I need to consume to decrease migraines. Let's say if you're struggling with migraines, Penny, you need to go grain-free. Start with no grain, no pain. Now, that's not to say that mineral deficiencies can't also be a trigger for migraines. Magnesium deficiency, for example, can trigger migraines. Magnesium is a migraine prophylactic. And the best way to measure, there are a number of different ways to measure minerals, but the best way to measure mineral is not in the serum, which is the way most doctors, because they're not trained in nutrition, they don't understand nutritional redistribution in the bloodstream, and so they measure it in the blood, and it can be very inaccurate and very misleading. So you don't want your nutrients to be measured from your serum. You ideally want to have your nutrients measured intracellularly. So it's called intracellular testing. It's one of the most effective and accurate ways. And some doctors can do what's called red blood cell magnesium testing, which is an intracellular type of test because they're measuring magnesium content inside the red blood cell. I prefer lymphocyte magnesium levels over red blood cell magnesium levels. And the reason why, lymphocytes have a longer lifespan, so you can get a longer window of nutritional accuracy by looking inside the lymphocyte versus looking inside the red blood cell. So you want to ask for intracellular testing. I'm new to gluten-free, assuming that yeast is out. Is nutritional yeast allowed? No. If you're new to the gluten-free diet, you want to keep yeast out. One of the reasons why, and this includes nutritional yeast, there's certain types of nutritional yeast like Saccharomyces is one of the species, and that can mimic or emulate gluten. There's a crossover, a cross-reactivity that can occur. So and this is where we see a lot of people struggle when they're going gluten-free, is they're using a lot of nutritional yeast in their diet, and they continue to have problems and struggle. It's because that yeast can mimic the gluten. They're very, very similar. The proteins that the yeast produces, there are little proteins on the wall of yeast called hyphal wall proteins, and these proteins can emulate or look like gluten to the immune system. And so it's better to avoid yeast, at least for the first 6 months when you're embarking newly on the gluten-free lifestyle. Let's see here. Maria is asking, most pasture-raised chickens are fed grains. Where can I purchase truly pasture-raised organic chicken? You can't, because all chicken is going to be made or produced with some grain. What you're looking for, Maria, and understand that chickens are designed to eat seeds, which is what grains are. Chickens you're not going to find gluten in chicken meat from a chicken that maybe had some grain in its diet. What the problem is not the grain per se causing gluten to show up in the meat. The problem with chickens that are raised on these mass commercial farms is that they're penned up in these really, really small, tight quarters. They don't get sunshine. They don't get any natural grass or bugs. They're not eating anything that is native to what a chicken might eat in the wild. Remember, chickens are jungle birds, originally. before they became majorly domesticated. But chickens are not designed to eat grain as the primary staple in their diet. They're designed to eat grass and bugs, and supplementing them with some grain is okay. What you want to be careful of is that if a farmer is using some grain to supplement feed the chickens, that supplemental feed is organic, because the problem you're going to run into is with non-organic grain supplements for chickens, you get glyphosate, which is a very toxic compound. We don't want glyphosate showing up in your food. Glyphosate disrupts your microbiome. It acts as a chelator. It can disrupt the shikimate pathway in the GI tract, leading to tryptophan dysfunction and deficiency, which makes it harder to make serotonin and melatonin, which regulates your mood and regulates your brain function and your sleep. So you don't want to eat a bunch of chicken that's been fed a bunch of genetically modified, pesticide-loaded grain. But if you've got a farmer who's doing free-range chickens, truly free-range, where they're doing some, because in the winter months when up north, when the grass is, there's no grass for the chicken to eat, really. The chicken's got to eat something, so they will supplement with grain. It just needs to be organic. And like I have chickens as an example, and we use an organic corn and soy free feed with our chickens, and we use things like flax, and we feed them insects, freeze-dried insects and other things as well, to supplement their diet in the winter months when there's less available natural grass for them to eat, and the bugs kind of go into hibernation in the winter months. And so, but again, that doesn't mean that the meat contains gluten or that the egg contains gluten. So just point of clarity, hope that helps you. So look for free-range organic as your option. Let's see here. Do you know a source for good, high-quality olive or avocado oil? There are a lot of them, Kat. And one of the things that I would just make sure that you're aware of is that when you're looking for any oil, whether it be avocado or olive oil, it needs to be in glass, not plastic. A lot of the plastic containers, remember that oils are carriers of chemicals, and so a lot of the chemicals that degrade from the plastic dissolve into that oil very, very efficiently and very effectively, and you don't want that. So use glass. Buy oil that's in glass. Number two, it should be dark glass, because oils like avocado and olive oil are sensitive. They're photosensitive to light, so they will oxidize the more light penetrance comes through that glass. So you want dark glass bottles to protect and preserve the oil, the integrity of it, because those two oils, well, predominantly olive oil is a monounsaturated fat, so it's more prone to it's going to be more prone to oxidation. It's going to be more prone to light damaging it. So that dark glass bottle is very important to protect it. And then you want to make sure it's organic. You want to make sure it is unrefined. Okay, not refined, but unrefined. You want the oil to be thicker. Typically, olive oil is very green. So you look at it and you can assess it in that way. And you want it to be extra virgin. So cold pressed, extra virgin, unrefined, organic, in dark glass bottles for protection. And there are a number of different brands that you can buy in major stores that fit those rules. So I would just suggest that you go and give a few different ones a try. When you're opening the bottle and looking at it, the thicker and the denser the oil, in other words, the less translucent it is, more likely the higher quality it is, because real olive oil is not, a lot of these companies, the olive oil is very clear and it's very pristine, but real olive oil, that first pressed real olive oil is actually very cloudy and very thick. Silvio says, hi Dr. O, I'm thinking about an online meeting with you, but I don't know if this would be useful, knowing that the lab tests from US may not be available in my area, Eastern Europe. We use a lot of lab testing, and send a lot of lab testing out to people who are in Europe and who are in other parts of the world. I mean, I have people that I see and consult with all over Europe, Paris, France, Italy. We've got clients in the UK, clients in Australia, New Zealand. We've got clients from Germany, clients from the Ukraine. So I see people from all over, and we're able to get quality lab work done, Silvio, if that's helpful for you. Let's see. Will you offer calcium only in 500 milligram one capsule anytime soon? No, probably not. One of the criteria to offer calcium is I always like to pair calcium with magnesium, because if you take high doses of calcium, you can actually induce a magnesium deficiency. That's actually been pretty well studied. So I don't generally put calcium on its own by itself for that reason, and don't have any intentions or plans, at least not in the near future, of creating a pure calcium product in that way. Is there anything I can do to help with an ascending thoracic aorta? I was just diagnosed while having a calcium score heart test. My score is a 2. My doctor wants me to take a statin. Well, I can't give you medical advice or tell you what to do. I can tell you what I would do if that were me. I would never take a statin. There is no circumstance in the world that you could put in front of me personally where I could say I justify taking the statin. And it's my opinion that statins are nothing more than poison. Now that being the case, you've got to make that decision for yourself, between you and your doctor. The questions in the line of logic that I would just have you think about is, when you talk about a calcium score, what they're really measuring is they're measuring the occlusion of the artery, the calcium deposition in the artery. Well, why would an artery have calcium deposition which, occludes or narrows its opening? Inflammation is the reason why. Inflammation, okay, not cholesterol. Cholesterol does not cause inflammation to the arterial lining. Cholesterol is an innocent bystander. We need bad cholesterol, which is LDL. LDL is oftentimes referred to as bad cholesterol, right? Low density lipoprotein. And doctors have demonized LDL and blamed it for stroke and heart attack, when in fact that the science doesn't hold up. I mean, there was a few years ago, there was a major study, 68,000 people, statins versus no statins, and the outcomes were better in the non-statin groups. There was another study that published that showed that people that had higher levels of LDL had longer lifespans. So I don't think we can just put everybody on statin drugs and solve the issue of heart disease. And as a matter of fact, doctors in hospital systems have been trying to do that now since the 80s, right? We've got, over 40 years of statin use. And do we have less heart disease? Do we have less stroke? And the answer is no. To me, that's called empirical data. Empirical data is when you actually take what we've done and you look at the actual outcomes. Whereas research data is when you have potentially commercial interest funding a study that's short-term and usually a small amount of people are being studied, and then they try to infer whatever finding came from that study to the entire general population. I don't think you can do that, not super accurately. And so empirical data on statins shows that even despite their use for 40 years, we don't have less heart disease or less stroke. And so to me, if that's the truth, then we should be questioning the use of them, the way they're being used, because the outcomes have not been great. The outcomes of using them have been poor. So why it's like this. Why keep doing the same thing over and over again if the outcomes are bad? So you have to question that. The other thing you really should be asking is what's causing vascular inflammation? Because if you have consistent, persistent inflammation in the arterial lining, your body's naturally going to lay down cholesterol to try to put that inflammation out. And so that's where plaque formation can come. So if you solve the inflammation, you don't need to reduce your cholesterol. You solve for the inflammation first. Some of the top causes of vascular inflammation that increase the risk for heart disease. Hydrogenated oil is probably one of the biggest. Sugar is a big one. Grains are a huge one. So if you follow along in No Grain, No Pain, that's a great place to start to reduce some of the more common inflammatory foods that can cause or contribute to inflammatory vascular disease without having to worry so much about cholesterol. To my opinion, cholesterol, the whole cholesterol theory of disease is nothing more than, I'm just going to be blunt, scientific rhetoric and, companies who have very large influence that they shouldn't have, that are influencing the research and paying for the research and publishing the research that they want people to see, but not publishing the research that is counter to their position. And so we've created an entire society where people believe that cholesterol is evil. I want you to think about this with cholesterol too. Cholesterol won a Nobel Prize in 1998. Bad cholesterol, LDL. It was discovered that you need bad cholesterol to form brain synapses. And that's why it won a Nobel Prize. So all these people and all these doctors that are out there recommending that you need your cholesterol. I've heard cardiologists say, I want your cholesterol at 0, which is preposterous. It's ignorant. It's a crazy statement. And you need cholesterol to make nerve cells communicate with each other. This is why we're seeing, one of the reasons why we're seeing increases in dementia is that you can correlate the increased use of statin medications to the increased incidence of dementia. Now, I know correlation is not causation, but we have to start thinking about this because we didn't have as much dementia prior statins. We didn't. Now, there are other things certainly that can contribute to dementia, but again, going back to the point at hand, which is, should you use statins to lower your cholesterol? No, I like I said, there's not a scenario you could put in front of me scientifically that would make me ever take one personally. And so again, that decision you'll have to make. But hopefully that information I just gave you is helpful. You can also go back and watch. I've done an entire show on the cholesterol myth, and you can check that out and maybe get a little bit more granular in detail so that you can have a meaningful conversation with your doctor coming from an intelligent place as opposed to just going in and not really knowing what to say. What causes cataracts? Do you recommend surgery? If not, what are some ways I can get rid of them? Well, there's a lot of different things that cause cataracts, and one of the things that contributes to cataracts is gluten. If we can post below, we can post a link to our show about the eyes and gluten in the eyes. Laura, you can read that and check that out. And there are lots of different things that you can do nutritionally to support healthy eye function as well. We have a product, a formulation called Focus, F-O-C-U-S, that is designed to support eye function, and you might find that helpful or beneficial as well. What can cause piercing-like pain in the feet when submerged in cold water at the same temperature? I just feel cold, but my wife feels increasing pain to the point that she has to get out of the water. Well, sometimes that's called hyperparesthesia, Mario. I mean, formally, a doctor might call that hyperparesthesia, where the sensation that your wife is feeling is far greater than the sensation that you're feeling, and that can lead to pain. It's a form of neuropathy, and so there are a lot of different things that can contribute to neuropathy. Gluten certainly is one of them. I don't know if your wife is gluten-free or not, but gluten is one of the most common causes of peripheral neuropathy for patients. We also see B vitamin deficiencies can contribute to hyperparesthesia, so like B12, vitamin B1, vitamin B6, vitamin B5 deficiencies can all contribute to neuropathy in the feet, and so those are all possibilities. So maybe a good B complex might be supportive of your wife as well, but I definitely would get it checked out. Might not be a bad idea to get some neurological testing done to kind of get a formal understanding of what is going on with the nerve. There are different kinds of neuropathies, and so again, knowing which kind of neuropathy can sometimes help you know what better to do naturally to support it. If one tests positive for parietal cell antibodies, is there any way to heal your parietal cells? Yes. So parietal cell antibodies are antibodies that your body will produce against the specialized cells in the stomach that are responsible for producing intrinsic factor and acid. And generally speaking, when a person's making parietal cell antibodies, it's a form of autoimmune disease. And so we have to ask, well, what causes the autoimmune disease, or what are the triggers for autoimmune disease? So any of you who've been following me for any length of time already know this answer. There's 4 categorical triggers for autoimmunity. The first is eating the wrong food. The second is chemical exposures. The third is microbial imbalance. And the fourth is nutritional deficit. So those 4 categories should be tested by your doctor in order to help you understand what you need to change about your diet and lifestyle so that your body has the capacity to heal. Right, so that those antibodies go away, because over time, if you do the right things, those antibodies should go away, and that's how they heal. But if you continue to make antibodies against your own cells, they won't heal. So you got to figure out what the triggers are. Again, the 4 categories: food, chemicals, microbial imbalance, and nutritional deficiency. That needs to be tested if you really want to find real answers. Are the heart of palm noodles a healthy alternative to pasta? Yeah, just check for, they're gluten-free in that regard, and just check for any other added ingredients that, or other fillers that might not be very good for you. Do you think oxalates could have anything to do with the body rash, edematous, leg, ankle, foot, crazy itching, redness, sloughing tissue in the areas where rash is present? It's possible. Oxalates, are little tiny crystal shards that can lodge in tissues, and certainly I've seen them create rashes and inflammation and swelling. So it is a possibility. Oxalates generally come from either high oxalate foods, or they'll come from, sometimes when people have a yeast overgrowth internally, yeast have a pathway, a metabolic pathway, whereby they are capable of producing oxalates. So even if you were on a low oxalate diet, if you had a yeast overgrowth, oxalates could be formed by that yeast, thus contributing to the oxalate burden on the body. But yes, it's possible for that to be the case. Let's see, Carl says, hello, doctor. Ever since leaving the military with over 20 plus years, I have ringing in the ears. It's constant, especially when I'm in a room by myself, sometimes very loud. I've been tested for hearing loss, which never did anything, and the VA hasn't been able to do a thing for 35 years since I was discharged. I was an engineer in the Navy, worked in the engine room. Yeah, so there's traumatic damage that can occur to the ears with prolonged loud sounds. But then, Carl, there are also other things that can cause, that I have seen be very common causes of tinnitus. One of them is heavy metal. And if we're talking about 35 years, that puts you in the age bracket or age category where you grew up in what's called the lead age. There was lead in the gas, lead in the pipes, lead in the toys, lead in the paint. And so you're probably exposed to your fair share of lead. Well, lead's a neurotoxin that can contribute to tinnitus, and so it might not be a bad idea for you to have your doctors check you for lead as a potential cause. Lead testing is, doing serum lead testing is no good because it only tells you what your current exposure to lead is. Well, today we don't use lead in most products, so not so much worried about current lead exposure as we would be about bioaccumulative lead exposure. So there's a type of test that you want to ask for. It's called a pre and post provocation test, where they use a provoking agent, an oral provoking agent called EDTA or DMSO, to pull lead out of you and see if your levels are high. But ask for that test, and that will help you understand whether lead may be playing a role. Now, I've seen other nutrient deficiencies also contribute to tinnitus, particularly the B vitamins, B12 deficiency can cause it. And gluten. So if you're not gluten-free, if you haven't changed your diet, I've had people tell me on a regular basis over the past 21 years, when going gluten-free, their tinnitus improves. And in some cases it goes away, and in other cases it just gets better, but it doesn't fully go away. So, again, it's not one of those things. It's not like a one-size-fits-all approach is going to work for anyone. But I would start with those areas, B vitamins, lead, and a gluten-free diet as a first effort to see if you can get some improvement. And thank you for your service, Carl. Let's see, Russ. Just a thank you from Russ. Well, you're welcome, Russ, and thanks for tuning in. What are your thoughts on cholesterol care from full scripts to help with high LDL? I think I'm just going to go back and reiterate, Mary, back up, rewind, and listen to what I said a minute ago about cholesterol. I think if you're trying to treat cholesterol as a bad guy, you're wrong. You're missing the mark, in my opinion. And I know this flies in the face of what most people in the modern world believe. I don't care. Show me the evidence where lowering cholesterol has ever helped anybody not have a stroke or heart attack. Doesn't exist. And again, if we look at the research on it and the cardiology-based research, most of that is so biased and so funded by industry that it's very hard to take it seriously. But again, looking at empirical data, we don't have less heart disease. Lowering cholesterol, it hasn't worked. Lowering cholesterol is the wrong target. Inflammation is the right target. So quit worrying about cholesterol and start worrying about inflammation. And that's where the magic happens. Also, I would encourage you to go back and watch my cholesterol show. Let's see, my LDL is 119 and ratio is 2.3, but the neurologists I follow say it's important to keep LDL low when worried about brain health. I don't agree with that. I think there are a lot of reasons why dementia can happen. Cholesterol is typically, LDL is one of the things that preserves the mind. If your LDL is 119, first of all, that's not super high. Now, by today's standards, it's high. And if you know the history of on the numbers, the cholesterol numbers. When I first started practice 21 years ago, normal cholesterol was 280. And the reason now it's 200, they call normal cholesterol 200 today, is because the government keeps convening panels of doctors who are supposed experts on cardiovascular disease, but these doctors work for Merck and Pfizer. And so you can't have true science when there's so much potential for bias. There's so much potential for personal gain when you collect a group of doctors who are all on the payroll for two of the companies that have the most to gain by lowering the normal levels of cholesterol, because every time they lower it, it increases their prescription base and their profit margins. And that, you can't have that if you want true science. If you want true science, you have to have a non-conflicting, non-biased body of people who can convene and agree through the scientific method. And we just don't have that with cholesterol. We have anything but that. And so, again, there are a couple books you might check out. One is by a cardiologist by the name of Sinatra. It's called The Cholesterol Myth. It's a really good book. Go check out my video on cholesterol as well. But again, I'm not a fan of worrying about cholesterol. Now, there's one type of cholesterol problem that I would say, yes, there is merit, and that's a type of cholesterol disease, and it's called hyperfamilial cholesterolemia. And generally speaking, if your cholesterol is not well over 300, you don't have hyperfamilial cholesterolemia. This truly is a genetic hypercholesterol that can increase the risk. But if we're talking 280 or less, in my opinion, cholesterol would be the least of my personal worries. Let's see here. John's like, I've taken some enzyme before and it did help when I got a gluten-free dish from, okay, not a question there, just a comment on taking Gluten Shield, I assume, and it being beneficial when you're eating out at a restaurant. Can you suggest a clean B6 or P5P? So if you're looking for a clean B6 or P5P, B Complete would be one I would recommend, and it's got high levels of B6, but it also has a B complex in it. The other would be multi-nutrients. It's a multivitamin, but it has high dose B6 in it for people who are looking to take more B6, and it's P5P is what we use, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is a type of B6 that's the most available and the most absorbable. When should I use the detox powder vitamin C versus detox C capsules? I have both. So one of the best things to do is you can use either one. But if you're doing like a vitamin C flush, where you're doing high doses of vitamin C over a very short period of time to try to cleanse the bowel, use the powder. But any other time you could use either one. You don't want to use the pills if you're trying to do a flush, because it's too many pills to take and they won't break down fast enough for you to create let's just say a pleasant flushing experience. That's where the powder trumps the pills. But either one at any other time would be fine. Mary asking about store-bought kombucha and why I'm not a fan. Because it's sugar and alcohol water with some bacteria in it. And sugar's not good for you, and alcohol is not good for you. And so drinking kombucha that way is just not something that, there's a cardinal rule of nutrition. You can't get healthy eating things that aren't healthy. And so kombucha, store-bought kombucha, is full of sugar and full of alcohol, and this is why I don't recommend it. Let's see. Mary's asking about enzyme supplements. Can one assume that they are all enteric coated to get through stomach acid? Not necessarily. I think it would depend on the company and depend on their formulation, depend on what their enzymes are for. Like, for example, some enzymes are designed to work in the stomach to help to break down a protein. So like proteases is an example of that. And so they don't necessarily need to be coated to bypass the stomach, because they're working at the pH in the stomach. So it depends on the formula and what you're trying to use it for. Is eating burned pecans bad? The outside of the burned pecan is black, but the inside is brown. I would say don't make a habit of eating burned pecans, because anytime you burn food, you create you create a potentially toxic byproduct of burnt ashy material. And with pecans, there's some carbohydrate in there that can form acrylamide, which is known to be a carcinogenic substance. I'd say if you ate some pecans that were a little overcooked at Christmas time or something like that, it just every once in a while probably wouldn't be all that big of a deal, but I just wouldn't make a habit out of it. What about the olive oils that come from cans? Christina wants to know. What's the can made out of? What's the can coated with? These are the questions that I would have. The reason I like glass is because glass is generally not coated with anything that could be bad. Like some of these cans are lined with petrochemical-based plastics, like BPA-based substances. So that would be the question with the cans. Let's see here. Ralda says, I'm gluten-free. I have Hashimoto. My T3 is still low, even with medication. Knowing I am perimenopausal, what should I look for in this case? I am gaining weight with the super healthy diet. I mean, that's a massive question. If your T3 is low, even with your medication, we'll obviously talk to your doctor about your dose, but I think more than anything, one of the things that causes T3 to be low, because what I don't know, Ralda, is what kind of medicine are you on? Because if you're on a T4 preparation, like levothyroxine or Synthroid, well, first of all, those have corn in them, so if you're trying to be gluten-free, those are bad choices. But some people have a hard time converting T4, which is what many of the medications are. They're T4 preparations. And some people can't convert T4 very well into T3. And now T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. And it could be that you're a poor converter, that you're not converting T4 to T3 very well, and that's why your T3 is still low even though you're on medication. So a couple of things that you may want to consider. One is selenium as a supplement. Selenium runs an enzyme system called deiodinase. There's a special type of enzyme so T4, the 4 in T4 represents how many molecules of iodine are attached to a tyrosine backbone. The deiodinase enzyme, its job is to remove one of the iodine molecules to form T3. So T4 minus 1 iodine equals T3. T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone that helps run your metabolism. For that enzyme to work, you need selenium. Selenium is the car key that starts the motor of that enzyme engine. And so some people are selenium deficient, and so they become poor converters of T4 into T3. So you can take supplemental selenium. It's very safe. You can take up to 400 micrograms a day. And what many people find is when they get on selenium, they find their T3 levels actually go up because it improves their conversion of their medicine into T3. Or it even improves their conversion of their own T4 into T3. So I would look at that, maybe ask your doctor to measure your selenium. Again, the best way to measure is intracellular, not blood levels, but intracellular levels. My TSH is 11, my free T3 is 2.8, my T4 is 1. I've not taken any medication in 3 months. Should I go back on? Well, one, I'm not going to tell you whether you should or shouldn't go back on your medication. That's between you and your doctor. But TSH can be high for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one reason why T3 or TSH might be high is an iodine deficiency. Especially with your T4 being on the low end of the range. At free T4 at 1 is kind of low end. Your T3 sounds like it's in a pretty good place. I mean, the range for T3 on most labs is anywhere between like 2.2 all the way up to like 4, and so you're kind of on the lower, but still not terrible. What I would suggest. If you're trying, I would always suggest to change your diet, period. I mean, because medicine doesn't solve anyone's health issue. Medicine alters or manipulates your chemistry to help you feel better, in some cases. But it doesn't solve why your body is not producing adequate thyroid hormone. And so the question that should be asked is, why is your TSH high? Which, by the way, for those of you that don't know, TSH being high means you have low thyroid function. And so why is your TSH high? There are a lot of reasons why that can happen. I've seen zinc deficiency contribute to it, magnesium deficiency contribute to it, iodine deficiency contributes to it, gluten consumption contributes to it. Antibodies contribute to it. If you've never had your antibody levels checked for, thyroid antibodies, there's 2 of them that can be checked for low thyroid. One's called TPO, thyroid peroxidase. The other's called antithyroglobulin. And so both of those should all be measured, so that you can get a better, clearer picture of what actually is happening. But with the limited detailed information that you did put in, it's not enough information to make any huge or great decisions. I mean, the best thing you can do right now, supplementally, and this would just be to support the health of your body and to give your thyroid the nutrients, that it will use to help you make thyroid hormone, is we have a formula called Ultra Thyroid Support, which is just, again, it's supportive of giving the thyroid ingredients that it naturally needs to help produce thyroid hormone. The other would be to take a really high quality multivitamin like Ultra Nutrients, which has iodine and has a lot of other nutrients in it that will support your thyroid function. But change your diet. No grain, no pain would be a great place to start. We see so many people and hear back from so many people who have been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, and when they change their diet, their need for their medication goes away or reduces. It doesn't always go away, but in many cases it reduces. In many cases it does go away. And so, gluten being in some cases the cause of the thyroid problem, and that's where, again, you want to get that looked at. Yeah, so another question about kombucha. I don't recommend kombucha. It's just, to me, kombucha is like granola bars. In the 80s, late 70s, 80s, they were promoting granola bars as health food, right? And so kids were getting sent off to school with granola bars, which was nothing more than, cereal grains compressed together with sugar. But it was all the rage and all the rave, and everybody thought they were being healthy for themselves. Well, kombucha falls in that same category. It is not healthy, in my opinion. And so I don't recommend it, even lower sugar varieties, because you're still drinking alcohol. And so, if you just insist that you need to have it, that more power to you, but it's just not something that I personally would ever get behind. So hopefully that's a helpful thought for you. Why do I get so tired after taking vitamin D? It could be a lot of reasons there. It could be an ingredient in the vitamin D preparation that you react to. Some of the vitamin D preparations are, immersed in oils. And I see a lot of times when people come to me, they're allergic to the oil. Some of them are in sesame oil, some of them are in, like grapeseed oil or other oil preparations, because the oil emulsifies the vitamin D. It's fat soluble, so it helps to improve the absorption of the vitamin D. But you could be reactive to an emulsion of the oil. You could be reactive to an ingredient in the capsule. There's just a lot of different reasons potentially why it could happen. Let's see, I have a pain on my left side, right at the bottom of my ribs. Sometimes it is slight, but more now becoming a pain that feels like a knot. Could eating foods that I am sensitive to cause this? Yes, it could. And that may be what's happening. Can we meet you in Maui? Richard says, I don't know where that, maybe I'm wearing a Maui shirt, maybe that's it. I got this shirt in Hawaii this year. I celebrated my 50th birthday with my 50th state. So I was just in Maui in October. But if you're asking if you want me to come to Maui and do something, if you get 100 people together and you guys want me to come to Maui, and I can do a talk and we can do a whole thing. But generally, when I travel like that, I require at least 100 people to make the trip away from my family and away from life worth the time. Let's see, my recently diagnosed issue is GERD. I refused to take the meds, but eventually I gave in as things were getting worse. Any holistic ways to take care of this, please? You got to figure out what is causing the GERD. First of all, most cases of GERD stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease. There are a lot of different theories, but most doctors diagnose GERD based on symptoms. Sometimes they diagnose it based on an upper GI or an upper endoscopy, where they'll find like irritation or erythematous lesions in the esophagus or stomach. But that's not GERD. technically GERD is where you have too much acid production. Most people don't have too much acid. What they have is damage to the protective coating or lining of their esophagus or stomach. And so when that area is damaged, you make acid. You're going to make acid. But if your lining is damaged, then the acid causes pain and irritation to the tissue. Taking an antacid blocks your ability to make acid, therefore it can reduce the symptoms. But it doesn't mean you're making too much acid. Most cases are where people have damage to the lining, and so then any acid causes pain and inflammation. So taking the antacid, again, reduces the symptoms. Now, you have to ask, why was there damage to the stomach or the esophagus in the first place? What was creating that damage? And there's some things that can create that damage that are microbial in nature. There's a kind of bacteria called Helicobacter pylori that some people develop overgrowths of, and that bacteria can drill tiny microscopic holes into your lining of your stomach, and that can predispose your stomach to hurting, as your stomach produces acid. So that's an example of something that can cause it. I don't know if your doctor's tested you for H. pylori, but that would be a nice place to start as well. And then there are foods that damage the lining of the stomach and esophagus. Gluten is one of them. Grains as a whole are common. Dairy is a common food that can damage the stomach lining. Sugar can damage the stomach lining. And then you can have just random, so a lot of people have just random food sensitivities that for them, they're unique to the person, can damage the lining. That's why at Gluten Free Society we offer 2 kinds of tests to try to help people to determine what food they shouldn't eat. One is genetic testing for gluten sensitivity, so you can get clarity around whether or not you need to change your diet. And then the other is food sensitivity testing, so that you can look to see whether or not you have, delayed hypersensitivity responses to foods that would otherwise be healthy, but for you they're not. I mean, I've seen cases, if you've read my book, No Grain, No Pain, I mean, I can say it's a famous story, but a lot of people who've read it remember the story of Ginger, who was dying, had 6 months to live, terminal, and one of the reasons she was dying was she was reactive to blueberries, and she was eating a blueberry smoothie for breakfast every morning. And so we had to figure that out, and the way we did that was through testing. And so that same testing is available online now. We made that available a couple of months ago. So for those of you who are new and aren't aware, and I'll put a link to that if you want to go read more about how to check and how to test for food properly. I'm getting over a cold. I'm pretty much over it, but my ear still makes noise when I swallow for a few days. Any suggestions on what to do? NAC, Lily. NAC can help clean your sinuses out and clean your and help you drain. NAC, N-acetylcysteine, is what that stands for. Ultra NAC is what we have. It's the formula we have. But about 2 grams of NAC a day can help with that. Can help drain your ears and drain your head. The other thing you might consider too, because sometimes you get water retention because of a physical obstruction of the eustachian canal behind the ear, and so a good chiropractor knows how to adjust ears. They can actually adjust your ears and open that eustachian tube, and you get great drainage when that happens. I can actually remember I had one time my neighbor next door to my practice was a pediatrician, and I had been seeing a lot of her patients, and anyway, her patients were saying good things about me, so she came over and visited. We hadn't met before this, and she was like, "Hey, you know what? I had this very same problem where I have a lot of fluid retention in my ear, and I just can't make it go away." I said, "Sit down," and I adjusted her ear, and within minutes she was running to the bathroom because the mucus just started draining out of her head down her what was prior a closed eustachian tube, and after that, she'd never had a problem again. So it's a powerful maneuver, and it may be part of your problem, it may not be, but that would be something to consider if NAC, N-acetylcysteine, doesn't work. Because sometimes it's chemical and sometimes it's physical, and the adjustment can definitely do something for the physical part. What can I do to treat my heavy congestion and sore throat besides the immune protocol that I'm doing? So heavy congestion, I have a formula called Ultra Sinus Support. Ultra Sinus Support, which is one of the key ingredients in that formula is NAC, which I was just talking about, which helps to drain the mucus out of the head, the congestion out of the head. The other thing would be to consider a neti pot. If you haven't already considered a neti pot, the neti pot with saline in it, can clean out and flush out the sinus cavities. And so some people do really, really well with their congestion by just using a neti pot. As far as the sore throat, one of the things that I have seen be very effective for sore throats in people is silver, hydrolyzed silver. We have a spray called Ultra Silver, and you just pump about 5 sprays to the back of the throat and hold it there, and a lot of times that can do the trick. Let's see here. Natalia says, how do you test for oxalate sensitivity? Well, one of the easiest ways is to check the urine. There's what's called a 24-hour oxalate collection that can be done through the urine. And if you have high oxalate coming back, then it could mean that you have an oxalate problem. My B5 is high. Gene, if you're talking about your B5 level in your serum, as I've mentioned a number of times about serum values are not accurate representations of nutritional status. I can make your B5 levels high by giving you 1 B vitamin pill and waiting 3 hours and checking your blood, and I would get high levels in your blood if that pill was absorbed well. It doesn't mean that you have toxic levels of B5. It means once that B5 hits your bloodstream, it's now got to distribute and disperse into your tissues and into your cells. And so that transitionary time can lead to a misleading elevated serum level of B5. So I don't look at, this is why you have intracellular testing to help to determine whether inside of your cells you have deficiency of the nutrient. Because if you're relying on serum values, you get artificial highs, artificial lows, and everything else in between. Are we catabolic or anabolic during sleep? You're always a bit of both. It's a good question. I'd say more than anything, your body's trying to heal and repair during sleep. Well, the first part of healing and repairing is stripping away old damaged tissue, and that process is catabolic. And then the repairing aspect is anabolic, meaning you're putting new tissue together and you're healing and mending and knitting tissue. And so it's a little bit of both, but I would say you're predominantly anabolic when you sleep. So predominantly, but a little bit of both. Let's see here. I'm 51, in menopause since, I'm not sure what you mean by in menopause since if you mean for the past 2 years maybe. But I'm 51, I'm in menopause. I've been noticing low body temperature the past few years. I also feel worse when that's the case. Don't know where to start fixing that. Go see your doctor and ask them to measure and check your thyroid. A lot of times if your body temperature drops, you may have a metabolic issue, an endocrine issue where your thyroid's underperforming. So I'd start with that. That could be a real simple explanation for it. The other thing I would want to know is how often are you exercising? Because a lot of times when women are going through menopause, and especially if they're super symptomatic and a lot of hot flashes, irritability, and fatigue and brain fog, that's a lot of times where women quit working out and quit exercising. And so when you stop exercising, you actually reduce your total metabolic rate. You lower your metabolism because your muscles, as they shrink, your basic metabolic rate will start to drop. And so that is another reason why you can see somebody's core temperature coming down a little bit. So maintain that muscle mass, super important as you age. It's one of the greatest predictors of quality of life and longevity. Let's see, Catherine says, hi Dr. Osborne, I took your gluten sensitivity DNA test. I have 2 positive HLA-DQ1 gene alleles. Does this mean that all my sisters have the same genes? It depends. So if you had 2 HLA-DQ1, was it HLA-DQ alpha 1 or was it HLA-DQ beta 1 or was it one from each? Because there's 2 different genes that we measure, 4 total possible alleles from 2 different genes that we're measuring in that test. And so if you had 2 positives on your beta 1, what that means is that both your parents gave you 1 piece. Now, whether or not your parents gave your sisters that same piece, we don't know, because we don't have enough genetic information to make that lengthy of an extrapolation, but there's a strong likelihood. In other words, there's a 50% chance if both of your parents each had at least one genetic allele, there's a 50% chance that your sisters inherit that positive allele from your parents. But that's all we could say based on that limited amount of knowledge. Is taking supplements okay when fasting? Depends on the supplement. Like, I wouldn't take iron or zinc because they can tend to cause nausea on an empty stomach. But like, amino acids are perfectly fine on an empty stomach. So if you were taking something like carnitine or cysteine or glutamine or glutathione, perfectly fine on an empty stomach. Multivitamins and B vitamins can tend to cause nausea on an empty stomach. And I mean like complexes, right? B vitamin complexes. So I'd say test it out. Everybody's different in that regard, but definitely no to zinc, or definitely no to iron. But everything else is unique to individuals, and so play with it. And if you find that taking it on an empty stomach makes you nauseous, then add that food in so that doesn't happen. Mary says, I purchased your meal replacement. I'm looking forward to drinking it and benefiting from its nutritional values. Well, thanks for purchasing, Mary, and come back and review it and let us know how you enjoyed it and how it worked for you. Jennifer says, nothing beats the taste of true pasture chicken. I know, I have chickens at home. I live on a farm, and I agree. It's far superior in taste and flavor, in my opinion. I've been tested for early Sjogren's antibodies, which are positive. However, the traditional Sjogren's test is negative. Does that mean I will go on to develop full-blown Sjogren's? No, what it means is you already have antibodies. And so the fact that you have antibodies means there's already an autoimmune process that's occurring. Generally, when people go on to get a full-blown diagnosis is when the antibodies do enough damage over time that it starts to create a symptom that's apparent by you. And so, the fact of the matter is you've already got an active autoimmune process occurring in your body. So go back to asking the 4 fundamental questions of autoimmunity. What are they? Food, chemical exposures, microbial imbalance, and nutritional deficiencies. If you can answer those 4 questions, many people with antibodies find their antibody levels drop dramatically by being able to answer those 4 questions and applying them. So that's where I would encourage you to start looking into that as opposed to just waiting. Because, that's the whole thing with autoimmune disease is you don't wake up one day and have autoimmune disease. It takes decades to manifest. And it's the damage, it's the insidious damage, it's the slow insidious damage that occurs over time until loss of function is most apparent symptomatically. And that's usually when people seek out a doctor. That's why it takes, just if we look at celiac disease, it takes 20, 30 years to get a diagnosis. How many decades of damage has a person done at that point that could have been prevented by being proactive earlier in life? We need Warrior Bread. Will it be back in stock soon? Is it out of stock? Mel, do you know?
I don't think it is.
I think we have it in stock. Mary Ellen, I wasn't aware that it was out, but if it is out, it'll be back within a week or two. I know we have some coming in here pretty soon, so I wasn't aware we were totally out. Is calcium lactate a good source? I have low back pain and muscle twitches even though I take magnesium and potassium and salt every day. Vitamin D has helped, but I still have bone pain. Could that be calcium? It could be. It could be a lot of different things, but it could be calcium. And no, I don't like calcium lactate. Calcium glycinate, calcium citrate are pretty good sources. Calcium bisglycinate is a good source. Amino acid chelates are some of the better sources of calcium that are bioavailable and absorbable. Lactate I don't like. There's a dairy derivative in that, and I'm not keen to that. Let's see, ongoing problem with osteopenia. Any ideas? I supplement with D, 1 gram calcium, ultra nutrients, B cell deficient, sed rate 1, mystery in my bones. So when you say you have osteopenia, what is that based on? Because the whole premise of how osteopenia is diagnosed, in my opinion, is extremely flawed. Elizabeth, it's usually osteopenia is diagnosed when a doctor does what's called a DEXA scan, and they usually scan 3 major areas. They scan your spine, your left and your right hip. And what they're doing is they're sending x-rays into your bone, and they're measuring, simply speaking, they're measuring how well your bone absorbs those x-rays, and then they're comparing you to a 35-year-old. That's a huge flaw, because first of all, like, let's just take race as an example. Hopefully nobody calls me a racist today, but African Americans as a whole have denser bone. And this is a known fact. The bone densities are greater than Caucasian Americans. And so here we are using a bone scan that measures how well a bone absorbs an x-ray, and saying that if you don't compare to a 35-year-old, well, which 35-year-old, right? An African American 35-year-old, a Caucasian 35-year-old, a Hispanic 35-year-old. It's very esoteric, the data sets that were used to collect and create the standard. And so that whole premise is very flawed, because one, your bone density is you should never compare, unless you're a 35-year-old, you should never directly compare yourself to other 35-year-olds. And even if you are 35, I don't recommend that you compare yourself with other 35-year-olds, because people are different. We could take two 35-year-olds that weigh exactly the same, and one has greater bone density than the other, but they both have good bone densities. It's just that one has more because they work out more, or they weight train more, or they have more, generally they have a genetic denser bone. And so when you're relying on a bone scan to make a definitive, I have osteopenia, what you're really doing is you're relying on flawed data to come to a very huge conclusion that is probably wrong. There are a few other ways that I would suggest that you really look into whether or not you suspect there's bone loss. And one of them is to do an x-ray and get a good doctor who knows how to read an x-ray, a spinal x-ray and a hip x-ray, where they can look at the trabecular patterns of your bone, the visible trabecular patterns, because sometimes an x-ray is a better way. It's actually a visible picture where we can see areas of density of bone that are lost, and we can actually see that, and we can do side-to-side comparatives and visibly see that. So an x-ray can be helpful in that regard, but there's some urine tests that can be done where they measure a chemical compound called osteocalcin and another one called deoxypyridinoline, and these are bone turnover markers. So these are markers when your bone is breaking down, these substances are released in the urine. If you have really high amounts of these substances coming out of your urine, then it might be an indicator that your bone is breaking down faster than it's building, which is an indicator of bone loss as it's occurring. But I would never rely on a DEXA scan to make a determination about whether or not somebody had osteopenia. It's just poor and weak science. And in my opinion, it's DEXA scans are abused and overused, and the data that they deliver to people is not super accurate. Go back, Elizabeth, and watch my bone scan show. I did a whole show on bone scans and the myth of bone scans, and I think you might benefit from checking that information out. I was given some gourmet toffee from San Jose last week. Should I eat it or give it away? What's the toffee made out of? Because a lot of it's got corn sugar in it. A lot of the toffees, the caramels are generally derivative of corn, or can be. Not all of them, but they can be. Whether or not you should eat it is on you. It's sugar. And, far be it for me to tell you that you can't ever enjoy a treat, but at the same time, check the other ingredients. Check the quality. Is it organic? Let's see here. Is slightly elevated potassium a concern? Not really. It was slightly elevated, without a number. It's hard for me to know what your interpretation of slightly means, but if you're talking about 0.1 to 0.3 over the limit, typically it's not a big deal. Have it rechecked in a month and see if it's a consistent issue, or if it was just a day where maybe you could have been a little bit of dehydrated, or it could just have been a fluke in the lab. But generally speaking, 0.1 to 0.2 elevations and any of the electrolytes are not really typically all that big of a deal, unless there's something deeper going on, in the rest of your lab work that might allude to some other kind of problem. Is there a definitive test for SIBO? The most recommended test that's used today is a breath test. And so what happens generally is a doctor will give you sugar, and then they'll have you blow, and they'll collect your gases, your hydrogen and methane breath gases over time, to see whether or not you're producing excessive hydrogen or methane. In that regard, I'm not a big fan of SIBO testing in that way, because hydrogen and methane gases could be present for more reasons than just a bacterial overgrowth. I mean, yeast overgrowth can cause it too. So the SIBO testing that is used as a definitive test for SIBO, in my opinion, is not a definitive test. And it's lacking. And that's not to say that it can't be helpful in some situations, but I think it's like a bone scan. A lot of doctors will use it as a sole definitive to make major decisions. And I'm a big fan of not using antibiotics. And so if you come back with a positive SIBO test, one of the first courses of action most doctors use is an antibiotic called rifaximin. And you have to weigh the use of an antibiotic really super heavily. I mean, antibiotics are, what does that word mean? Antibiotic. It means against life. Is it something you really want to take? And a lot of doctors will say, oh, well, it's benign, it's not a big deal, take the antibiotic. But look at the mess that our country is in. Look at the mess of the health system. And hyperhygiene is part of that. Being germophobic and being super scared of germs, and taking antibiotics as if they're candy, dispensing them like they're candy, dispensing antibiotics into the water supply, antibiotic hand sanitizer, all this stuff where people have such germophobia. And look, what do we see correlate really, really well with hyperhygiene? Autoimmune disease. And one of the problems with an antibiotic on a SIBO test is if you have high hydrogen methane and it's being caused by yeast, not bacteria, and you take an antibiotic, you're now going to make that yeast worse. A lot of people I have seen have come to me after being on the antibiotic for SIBO that was diagnosed through a breath test, and in actuality, now they have a raging yeast overgrowth that has to be dealt with, and that creates problems in and of itself that are different and sometimes similar, but there's some overlap. But again, I don't know if that helps you, Catherine, but the SIBO breath tests, it wouldn't be the first thing I would think about if somebody, SIBO generally symptomatically is a lot of gas, a lot of bloating with eating as a symptom that a lot of people experience, but that wouldn't be my first decision in terms of trying to test that first. I mean, I maybe look at that as a tool down the road if a person wasn't reacting well to diet change and lifestyle change. Let's see here. Scroll on the left. Eggs giving me migraines, Gwen says. Have you heard of this? Yeah. Any food can be a migraine trigger if you're reacting to the food, but egg is a very common allergen. It's one of the 8 most common allergens, scientifically speaking. And so, egg being a trigger is very common. Leah wants to know, someone isn't taking supplements but has a high serum value of a nutrient, i.e. B6. Is there any other reason other than non-utilization, inability to get into the cell, or lack of cofactors that could create this, please? Those are all very good thoughts, Leah, in terms of what it could be, and I would start with those things because the likelihood that it's some type of genetic miscue is not. I mean, to my knowledge, there's no inborn errors of metabolism where vitamin B6 levels are toxically high. And then there could be some source of food that you're eating that's just an ultra-rich form of vitamin B6, and that your need for B6 is just not as great. And so for you, that elevates your levels. And so I would also look into a food diary and look at a nutrition almanac and kind of cross-reference the foods that you're eating and their B6 levels to see if you could be, consuming high doses in some of the foods that you're eating. Specifically, where we'll see that type of thing is like somebody eating liver. Liver is like a power-packed, nutrient-dense food, and so a lot of people who are taking heavy amounts of liver will see sometimes false serum elevations. Is there a specific temperature for women? Marianne is asking. I've always been 97.1. Normal temp is like a heat wave for me. No, I mean, there's a range for women and men, but some people naturally burn lower, some people naturally burn a little bit hotter, but I generally would say the classic 98.5 which is what's taught in the textbooks, is not always accurate for 100% of people, and some people run a little lower and some people run a little hotter. What are your thoughts on DHEA for women postmenopausal? I like it. I would never use DHEA in a person without testing it first, though. I would say that, because DHEA, when it's not low and you use it, can actually create things like depression and apathy and
There you go.
Okay. Can you guys hear me again? We lost audio for a minute. Just say yes if you can hear me. Testing, 1, 2, 3. You can hear me, Mel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go then. So we're talking about ox bile. And again, it doesn't make you dependent. Where a person would want to take an ox bile, like an ox bile supplement, would be if they had a gallbladder surgery where their gallbladder was removed, and so there's an issue with bile timing, because the gallbladder's job is to perfectly time the positioning of bile when you're eating so that you can better digest and emulsify the fat in the food that you're eating. So an inability to do this properly would lead to or contribute to fat-soluble vitamin deficiencies, like vitamin A, D, E, and K, but also omega-3 and omega-6 and 9 fatty acid deficiencies. And so that's where, taking bile won't make you dependent on it, but it sure, if you don't have a gallbladder, it sure can be helpful for supporting your digestion and absorption of fats. We have something, I have something called Lipogest, which has ox bile in it, and it's specifically for people that don't have a gallbladder, so that, so that they're supported with their digestion in a proper way. Would you have a high reverse T3 if you're not converting T3 and T4? If you're not converting T4 into T3, would you have a high reverse T3? You could. You don't always. It's not always 100% true, but it's common. So like a high reverse T3, generally speaking, on the reference ranges for most of these labs, they changed them recently, in my opinion, and I don't agree with the new reference range, but in my opinion, your reverse T3 should be below 18. Some of the new lab reference ranges are allowing it to be as high as 23, 24, which in my opinion is too high, and would prompt the recommendation of selenium in those cases. But it doesn't always have to be high either. So reverse T3 can be high, but it not always is it high. Would looking at the possible yeast overgrowth be important if testing has been done without any evidence of that in regards to whether the oxalates could be causing my issue with the rash? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Diana. Oh, I see what I think I see what you're saying. So if you've already been tested for yeast overgrowth and didn't have it, but you still have high oxalates, again, the yeast is not the only reason for high oxalates, but it's just one of the possibilities. And we can post that. Do we have that article on oxalates that we can post? I have an article and a really long show on oxalate to give you some more detailed information, Diana. I'm going to post that below here. What would be recommended daily dose of iron in supplements in order to prevent anemia symptoms in women with heavy periods? So it's different. I mean, I've gone as little as 25 milligrams a day, as high as 150 milligrams a day. But one of the things would be to monitor it to kind of figure out where that person needs to be, which is what I typically do. Because iron is one of those that it can be very helpful if a woman's losing blood heavily through a cycle and becoming transiently anemic as a result of that. Iron can be very effective in helping them. But if you get too much iron, what can happen is it can cause a lot of nausea, gastric distress. Iron is oxidative, so it can cause free radical damage, and it can also cause constipation. So there's a line that you just have to kind of be careful with that. But again, 25 milligrams to 150 would be kind of a range, but get those levels tested and checked. If you had to take metformin for the sake of my question, okay, for the sake of your question, but I can tell you I would never put that poison in my body. But if I had to take it for the sake of your question, the nutrients that you need to make sure that you're repleting: vitamin B12, folate, and CoQ10. And also vitamin B1. So a fantastic B complex like B complete, and then CoQ10 max. If you're trying to get good gluten-free products, you can check those two out on Gluten Free Society. How do you know if you have colon cancer? The primary diagnostic for colon cancer is to do a lower GI series or a colonoscopy, and to visibly identify and biopsy, if it looks, a lot of times they see a mass or a growth or a polyp, and then they take a sample of it and they biopsy it to confirm cancer or not. So that would be one way. If you're talking about like pre-cancer, if you're concerned you may have it and you're not sure because you're having GI problems, one of the signs or hallmarks that you want to really be careful about if this is happening to you is if you have consistent blood coming out of your stool, or if you have an unknown anemia, like if you have consistent blood coming out of your stool, you need to figure out why. And cancer can be a reason why, and so that's a good time to prompt investigation. Number two, though, would be if you have anemia all the time, like your red blood cell count low, your hemoglobin's low, your iron's low, and you don't know why. You don't bleed, you don't have blood loss. That can be a sign of occult blood loss. Occult blood loss means that, if you're losing blood in your stomach or higher up in your intestine, by the time it comes out in your stool, it doesn't look red anymore. It looks brown. So it's kind of camouflaged in your stool. And that's called occult blood or occult blood loss. And so some people that have cancers, they're bleeding internally and they don't know it because they can't see it coming out. And this can be measured for. You can ask your doctor to do what's called an occult blood test, or a fecal occult test. The other thing that you can do, there's a new type of home stool test called Cologuard that looks at different parameters of risks for colon cancer. And so this is now actually being used for a lot of people. Instead of doing a colonoscopy, they're doing this stool test instead because it can kind of pick up some things that might be an indicator that there's a possibility of cancer. So those are all three ways to look at it or look for it. But I would generally say, so many people are scared about cancer, and I wouldn't be worried about cancer if your bowels are running on time and you feel great and you have great energy and you don't have gastrointestinal problems. Then I wouldn't be so worried so much about whether or not you have colon cancer. And I don't know if that's your case or not, but if it is, worry less about cancer and worry more about living. Can you ignore total carbs and just focus on net carbs after fiber and added sugars along to stay within healthy limits? What are you referring to? Are you referring to a keto diet, or are you referring to no grain, no pain? Help me understand what you're asking specifically. What do you suggest for one with C. diff? If you have a C. difficile infection, I suggest getting with your doctor and figuring out, a plan of action. C. diff is a trigger, can be a trigger for colon cancers, and it can also be a trigger for ulcerative colitis and other inflammatory bowel dysfunction problems. There's supplements that you can take, in terms of supporting healthy GI tract function. We have a formula called Microbial Balance, which is a mixture of different herbs that help to support good balance of bacteria in your intestines and colon. I also suggest high probiotics, something like an ultrabiotic defense, because sometimes you need good, healthy bacteria to create competition for abnormal bacteria. And so that taking a strong probiotic can help to do that and support healthy balance. I'm honestly addicted to sugar, to be honest. What can I do to help get off sugar? Cinnamon, cinnamon is one thing that can be helpful for some people. One of the things I see super common, Nancy, in sugar addicts is yeast overgrowth. Yeast hijack the nervous system of your gut, and they'll send messages to your brain to crave sugar because they love sugar. They ferment it, and they want to keep getting fed by you. And so they'll actually kind of take over in a sense. So, you might get with a doctor and find out whether or not you have a yeast overgrowth. You also should have your magnesium, your zinc, your calcium, your chromium, and your B vitamin levels checked. As an example, chromium deficiency can cause sugar craving. Magnesium deficiency can cause sugar craving. Zinc deficiency can cause sugar craving. I don't know if you have it handy, Mel, but I did a video not too long ago. I think it's on our YouTube channel, but it's the top, I don't remember the exact title, Nancy, but it's like the top things your doctor never told you about your blood sugar. Watch that video, because I break down all the nutrients involved in regulating sugar and sugar craving, and watching that might be helpful for you to decide kind of what you want to do there. Okay, let's see. I like this. So all symptoms resolved upon going gluten-free last June. This is from Margaret. Symptoms I've had for years. I'm DQ2 positive and had all the classic stomach issues you have spoken about. Just a query. Would going gluten-free affect steroid hormone levels? My 11-deoxycortisol was negligible, where norm is 7 to 14 upon testing, but cortisol itself was okay. Through days at different, okay, so other adrenal results, okay, too. Reason for checking the adrenals was excessively high estradiol and low progesterone. Would it have anything to do with going gluten-free? No, not really. I mean, where you can get into trouble going gluten-free is if you're going gluten-free in a manner that's consistent with eating all the processed garbage gluten-free foods that are out there. Because a lot of them are GMO, a lot of them are loaded with pesticides that can mimic estrogen, and that could potentially cause an estradiol elevation on your blood work. So that's a potential possibility. There are a lot of estrogen mimicking compounds in plastics and other chemicals that typically that women are exposed to, also men, but women are exposed to, one being pesticides, another being cosmetics, another being plastics. And then there's certain species of mold like Fusarium that can create a toxin called zearalenone that mimics estrogen. And so I've seen cases where women had estrogen dominance develop as a result of something like that. But going gluten-free is not going to cause your hormone levels to crash. Eating gluten might cause your hormone levels to crash. Gluten is actually related to something called polyendocrine syndrome, which is where gluten damages the different endocrine organs, causing reduction of different hormones and steroids, which can really wreck a person. But going gluten-free, there's never been a study that says that going gluten-free causes hormone deficiency or hormone depletion. And humans don't require gluten in the diet. But again, it's the processed food that can be a problem. But if you're not doing that, then it might be more important for you to get a really solid nutritional workup done, because sometimes where your cortisol values, and in your case, not cortisol per se, but a metabolite of cortisol, you could have a nutrient deficiency that's blocking the conversion, and so that could be one of the reasons why it's low. I wouldn't hold a ton of stock into it unless you're just feeling horribly bad. But if you're feeling fantastic, I wouldn't hold a lot of stock in that marker. Let's scroll down a little bit more. Allison says, I have 2 MTHFR mutations. I read somewhere that iron and folate can be detrimental because of malabsorption. No, MTHFR does not cause malabsorption. Malabsorption would mean that your GI tract doesn't have the capacity to absorb the folate or the iron from the food that you eat. MTHFR is an enzyme in your body, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, that basically helps in the methylation cycle, whereby you're converting an amino acid called methionine or homocysteine into, generally speaking, into serotonin. And so whoever told you that or wherever you read that, it doesn't ring true at all to me. And maybe it's a lost in translation. Maybe what you mean is not, or maybe what you wrote is not necessarily what you mean. I don't know. It's hard for me to know, because secondhand, a lot of times these kinds of questions, on genetics, so many people hold way too much stock in MTHFR. It's not to say that MTHFR can't be an important marker to understand, but so many people think that MTHFR mutations are going to ruin their life. And the reality is I have MTHFR mutations and I'm perfectly healthy, and I don't do anything special about it. The thing I do special about everything is I just eat a good diet, and I try to follow a great lifestyle and lead by example. MTHFR is not going to make or break my health unless I put my body in an environmental situation where I strain the need for methylation, right? So MTHFR by itself does nothing, and that's really the takeaway message. A lot of people put way too much focus on these nutrigenomic tests. I think most of them are a waste of money. I actually developed one of the very first nutrigenomic tests 20 years ago. I was one of the first people to bring that testing to the market 20 years ago, and I partnered with a company. They hired me to help them in that endeavor. And we did 5 years of data collection on nutrigenomic testing and using supplements to try to help people incorporate or improve their health. And the reason I abandoned it was because it was ineffective. It sounds great on paper, but in clinical reality, it was very, very ineffective. And so I think a lot of people are out there hawking genetic testing for nutrigenomics so that you can take more supplements. It's not really something that I have seen be very effective in a clinical setting. I'll just put it like that. I'm not saying that there aren't people that haven't experienced clinical benefit, because there are always exceptions to the rule. But to use that as the sole kind of guide for what you should be doing, in my opinion, is very wrong, because what that's really basically saying is that your genetics predetermine your outcome, and that's not true. Genetics don't predetermine your outcome at all. Your choices do, and that's what you really need to be focused on. And if you follow no grain, no pain principles, the 7 non-negotiable fundamentals of a healthy living are food, the right food, exercise, sunshine, sleep, clean air, clean water, and stress mitigation management. And if you're doing those 7 things consistently to the best of your ability and the best of your knowledge, then you have a greater say about the outcome of your health than any genetic variant that you could possibly have. Okay, go down on the right. I think we'll grab one more here, because we're running out of, we already ran out of time, but we'll grab one more. Michelle's asking about spider veins, what causes them. I get some on my legs and face. I'm fair skinned, so they show easily. Sometimes they resolve on their own. So spider veins are, generally speaking, are a weakness in the collagen that forms your blood vessels. And so one of the things that you should be focused on is getting the nutrients that help to reinforce the collagen around your vessels. And so one thing you can take, and you can eat it too, is collagen. Foods that are rich in collagen, or you can use collagen supplementation. The other are bioflavonoids. Bioflavonoids are very, very protective and help form strong, healthy blood vessels that are not prone to breaking, which is what a varicosity is. So getting those in your diet. An example of a bioflavonoid, my favorite bioflavonoid, is quercetin, which has gotten a lot of media lately over, because of COVID. And quercetin is also a zinc ionophore, so it helps get zinc into your cells. And so it's been a lot in the press because of its help in supporting the immune system for people that have colds and flus. Okay, I gotta call it, folks. We got more questions, but I'm gonna call it because I got a obligation that I gotta go tend to. Thanks so much for spending part of your Thursday with me. Make sure you're back next week. We're gonna do a No Grain, No Pain 2023 kickoff. And it's going to be great. And hopefully those of you who are new to this will take great benefit from it so that you can, move your health and march in the right direction. Don't forget, our mission is to save 100 million lives. So use that hashtag save 100 million lives. And make sure you share this information with as many people as you think would benefit from it, because together we can reach more people and we can reach and help more people, right? So that's what it's all about. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you Tuesday night at 6 o'clock for the No Grain, No Pain Challenge kickoff. Take care.